Humanity is kind of transmitted a lot through stories, and it gives me a lot of feeling of hope and togetherness that I don't think many other things do. That's why I like stories. I like them as a way of transmitting to other people that they might not be alone. A lot of storytelling is based around having a common human experience. Everyone has a kind of way of expressing themselves creatively, I think, even if you don't consider yourself particularly creative. Because I was such a voracious reader, it made sense to me to write down my thoughts and write down my own stories. My family had a BBC Micro at the time. We had Elite, which was one of the early spaceship simulator games. And I also remember Aitken, which was like Colossal Cave Adventure. You navigated through all of these different areas and rooms and picked up objects and met strange characters. And because I wanted to be able to communicate with this game, which was all just white text on a black background, I had to actually be a better reader and a better writer. And I had to expand my vocabulary, and also had to understand the logic of how to talk to a computer, how to make the grammar that the computer understood. Probably that game had a lot to do with not only my becoming a writer, but also a game designer as well. Getting back into the text game, choose your own adventure type games, and using free software like Twine, I started to realize that maybe I actually had some talent in combining game design with writing. And so those two have come together.
1 more year, then we'll be back home in Singapore. You wouldn't believe the offshore habs they're building these days. 360-degree ocean views, personal drone dock on the mainland. It's called paradise.
1 more year.
1 more year.
Odin's masterpiece.
Sarah, come on up. It's ready.
Games are a lot like theatre because they're a virtual space where you designate the parameters, you put the props in there, you design the sound and the soundtrack, you design a lot of elements and cues. I remember Steve Gaynor telling me that in BioShock, the way that they wanted to introduce this big monster called the Big Daddy, what would happen is that they had a problem in that they didn't want to remove control from the player, but they knew that they wanted the player to see this big entrance. And the way that they did that was they just turned a spotlight on. And so the human mind and this human psychology is built so that when a light is on, we are distracted and we look towards it. And so that's what happens. When you play that game, when a light comes on in that room, you turn to look at what the light is shining on, and then the big monster kind of comes into it. And then that's a great introduction because it's quite scary and intimidating and very dramatic. So there's a load of techniques that games have in common with theatre, and in fact, I like to think about games as theatre largely. I think they are all about the performance of particular actions and tasks.
Watch your step, Majesty.
I'm not looking forward to all the ceremony today.
Your signet ring. There, you're ready.
Thank you, Alexei. Open the doors.
All hail Her Imperial Majesty, Emily Caldwin.
I like to call myself jokingly like an administrator of meaning, because all I do is kind of do that go-between job of going, okay, what are the resources we have and how can we tell the story the best way possible? You've got all these tools at your disposal within a game studio. You'll have an audio designer, a gameplay designer, programmers, animators. Each of them are extremely powerful in their own way. For example, even if you watched a Pixar film without any sound, the animation alone is very emotive. And then if you add the sound, you have a twice as powerful thing, and you still don't have any dialogue at that point. So you've already got like an amazing array of storytelling elements at your disposal. And it's kind of my job to administrate the most efficient way of transmitting the meaning of the story to the player. And actually, I often find that dialogue is not the most efficient way to get across meaning. actually showing people and having audio tell people how they're supposed to feel is a lot more efficient in telling story than words are. And so what you really want to do when I design games anyway, is you want to eliminate the need for an excess of text on screen. And of course, then I sit down and write. I do the screenwriting parts as well. So I do use dialogue, we do record it. But largely, I think showing and not telling is a much better way of having people feel like they experienced it themselves.
And suddenly, I was a cat. I tried to be quiet, but the bird was really scared.
You build a world, so what you're doing is you're sculpting someone's ability to experience that world in a particular way with a particular set of meanings or outcomes. But yeah, narrative design, I think, is, for me now at least, more about removing things or seeing how minimal it can get, because what you really want to give to someone who plays a game is room and space to be able to process what's happening to them and what that really means. I think of games a lot in terms of space, of virtual space. And a lot of games are very fast and they're about constantly moving forward, but like what's interesting is that those games actually do give you a lot of visual space in terms of they will give you a vista, for example, or they will give you one particular thing to concentrate on to the exclusion of everything else, which actually I think is a kind of palate cleanser, like a mind cleanser almost. I think one of the biggest difficulties I have is people even inside of games don't understand what a narrative designer does. They understand what a writer does. And sometimes people hire me and they're like, okay, do the words now. And that's fine because I can do that part. But fundamentally speaking, it's generally a better game if you're not only doing the dialogue or the words, but you're also designing how the story itself is experienced.
My name is Hannah, H-A-N-N-A-H. It's a palindrome. It reads the same backwards as forwards. It doesn't work if you mirror it though, it's not quite symmetrical, but well, I mean, you get the idea. Sorry. Hannah Smith, I live at 31 Gladstone Street.
We're actually really hobbled in the games industry by the separation of arts and sciences. On one side, people are not particularly interested in understanding the human condition in universities, and on the other side, in the humanities, you've got people who are completely devoid of any kind of technical knowledge. And so what happens is in a game studio you have to hire a narrative designer who knows the humanities side and then a game designer who knows the other side, and that creates a big problem because really what you want is to be able to produce narrative meaning mechanically yourself. What has really slowed storytelling down in games has been the separation of the two, and I think it's slowed down technological products themselves as well. I think Twitter and Facebook are only now realizing that they had to take into account the fact that socially people operate in a particular way, and they were just building technological systems and then putting people in them without thinking about how they were going to be used, about ethics, about thinking of any of these things. And I think there are huge consequences for that. There is no recognition of the fact that people in the humanities might be useful for scoping these projects, you know. Those two sides of the world do not collide usually in a useful, efficient manner. And I think it's actually starting to damage a lot of our perception of the world. I think it was David Hume who had this idea, and I blame him. We are currently in the city of the Enlightenment, so I'm allowed to attribute everything to them. But basically, this Scottish dude decided it would be more efficient. And so now, you know, years down the line, we've got this weirdly fragmented way of learning about the world, which it was done for a good reason then, but we should get rid of it. It's a tradition. It's not fundamentally useful anymore. What I would like in the future is for people to consider games as being part of their wider media diet. I like to watch films and television, and I like to go to the theatre, and I like to play games, and I like to watch animation, or I like to listen to music. So all of these things are, I think, part, and reading as well. There are so many things that are, I think, essential to our experience of the world, and we should be encouraged to also add games to that diet and not exclude other mediums and not have to be into them to the exclusion of everything else. I think in the future that's achievable. I think it's also achievable to dabble in the idea of creation of games and not have it take over your entire life. That's kind of a damaging thing as well, that people in games feel like they have to throw themselves into this thing and do it all the time in order to become any good at it. And what I'd like to see is just like hobbyist tinkering and just like fiddling around and like seeing if a thing works. And I think it'll happen. It would be nice, for example, for an 8-year-old to start up a game console or a PC or something or a tablet and then immediately know that they are a game designer. They might not have the vocabulary for it at that point, but it would be nice one day for a young girl to sit there and know, because I didn't know, and it took me 27 years to get there. So yeah, I think it's possible. It could be a nice future. We'll see.
Just kidding, I love skydiving. When you're in creative mode, you just fly. You just fly into the sky blocks and then you jump down.
Would you ever go skydiving in real life?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah, I'd risk it.
You're a daredevil.
I'll try landing.
Don't fall.
Part of why I deleted my Twitter is because I wanted to be able to make mistakes. I wanted to be able to fail in a way that wasn't going to be held against me. And actually, social media partly exacerbates sometimes the worst gender biases, because I think a lot of women are not allowed to make mistakes in public, because if they do, then they are always haunted by those mistakes. And the biggest reason that I wanted to become less visible is because if you become less visible, you can make more mistakes, and failures and mistakes are fundamental to creativity. You have to fail in order to improve. You have to constantly look at the ugliest parts of the things that you make and the person that you are, and you have to constantly reassess and try to counteract them. And especially as a woman on the internet, you are not allowed to make those mistakes. And that's what I wanted from life, is that I wanted to be able to make my own private mistakes, so that when I do something good, then I can come out there and be like, okay, here are all the ways in which I failed and all of these other things, but this is what was produced at the end of it. I don't want to hide the fact that I make mistakes. What I want to do is be empowered by them. I want to be able to have them and then be able to make more of them. I cannot deal with having to give a constant status of like what my creative status is, because it's so much more effort than actually creating something, is talking about creation, which I know is ironic to say here. But it can be quite exhausting to report to people constantly what it is you're doing and why, and what the problems are and the failures. Fundamentally, social media gave me a lot of empowerment, because I met a community of people I admired on Twitter, and it encouraged me to write things down. And also that community critiqued a lot of what I was writing. And so I improved because of that community. But if you do ever become popular and extremely visible from social media, it becomes like stifling and so loud and so intense that it's actually damaging. The sheer volume of feedback, it means that what you end up doing is like tending 24 hours to it. So there's part of me that just felt like in the end, I could use this time and effort and intellectual process to do better creative work. So you have to be really careful not to be sucked into this machine that keeps like churning away and give it all your stuff. In the end, Twitter was preventing me from producing work. I just felt like I was just spending all my time on it. You could say it's half my fault, but actually Twitter is designed so that you have that addictive process encroach upon you. It's designed to have you be on it all the time. I don't think that's healthy, and being aware of that is really important. Game designers are uniquely placed to understand how attention is currency. I mean, the reason that we have a trade is because we deal in attention, and also our medium is completely obsessed with spectacle and novelty, like absolutely obsessed with it. That's the reason why there's constantly a graphics arms race to have the shiniest graphics, the most realistic looking facial expressions, the most realistic looking battlefields, the most realistic looking guns. You know, there has to be a shine and a glint on everything. There has to be a sun that looks real. There has to be a lighting system. There has to be like fog that looks good. It's all this massive arms race, and to nowhere, because once things look like they do in real life, how is it different from real life? It isn't. Like, the point is to not have your medium be obsessed with mirroring what's real. Have a medium that's obsessed with creating what isn't real, what doesn't exist, what is completely beyond the scope. Like, that's what you want to push the medium into, is to seeing things you cannot see with your own eyes. I wonder if we could be doing more to supply people with places that they've never been before, things that they've never done. We cannibalize the genres we already have. The shooter genres, they all are kind of the same, and sometimes you get really pleasantly surprised by things, but mostly we just iterate on that gun, and I don't know if it's useful anymore to do that. I don't know, like, shouldn't we be exploring what it's like to talk to someone who's like, I don't know, who has a debilitating disease, or what it's like to, I don't know, to make friends with like an alien? I don't know. There's like a number of weird experiences that could be just as beautiful and moving as a Pixar movie, or as moving as like a piece of classical music.